Tonight on Bridge City News, those who need an EpiPen and an emergency shot of epinephrine may be in trouble. We will explain why. A train derailed north of the city, spilling canola and forcing a road to close. And we chat with Streets Alive about how they're helping the homeless in this heat. Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. A new report says EpiPens are in very limited supply across Canada right now. The devices give an emergency shot of epinephrine in cases of life-threatening allergic reactions. There are currently no alternative brands available in Canada. The company says it is able to provide EpiPen in doses for kids, but supply is being carefully managed. Health Canada says people who only have expired EpiPens should immediately call 911 and that the shortage is being caused by Pfizer Canada manufacturing issues.
There's already been a limitation in supply of both those products, and in the last recent past, there's been more issues that's led to a shortage of the EpiPen, the one that's used for adolescents and adults. And it's now to the point where during the month of August, there actually may not be any supply at the pharmacy level. For parents right now, I would say, check your child's EpiPen. If you need one, check it. It's just for this period of time, for this next month, that if you don't have to go and get an additional supply or you don't have to get an EpiPen, we're asking people to hold off.
Sharma also says Pfizer is expected to have more product available by the end of August. A train carrying grain derailed yesterday afternoon about 25 kilometers southeast of Lethbridge. Township Road 72 was closed at Highway 4 as the situation was sorted out. 10 of the train's cars reportedly missed the track's curve and went off the rails. All of the cars were carrying canola. Township Road 72 has since reopened, though cars can still be seen at the rail side. Close to 2,000 litres of diesel fuel leaked after a number of cars derailed at the Canadian National Railway yard in Edmonton overnight. Emergency crews were called out about 3 a.m. this morning. They arrived to find 6 cars had gone off the tracks. One street, 97th, was blocked off for an hour while hazardous materials workers and CN crews dealt with the spill and derailment. Lethbridge Airport had a minor crash scene on its hands yesterday. According to Lethbridge County, a small Aviat Husky aircraft experienced what is called a ground loop collision. A ground loop is usually the result of one brake gripping more than the other, creating a horizontal spin that causes the plane to lose its balance and crash. Fortunately, neither the pilot nor passenger were injured, but the aircraft won't be airworthy for a while.
The main left gear of the aircraft on the front had collapsed under it during the incident, and the wing was resting on the ground, and there was aviation fuel leaking out from the vent of the wing, so there was some fuel on the runway. Now, the city fire did lay down foam over that to make sure everything was fine, protect the area. But yeah, the aircraft wasn't flyable at that time.
The plane is privately owned and has been placed in a hangar. We had another heat warning in southwestern Alberta. Environment Canada is calling for a full week of hot and dry temperatures. Even though many of us enjoy the sunshine and warmer temps for farmers, this time of year can be a little more challenging.
Well, heat's affected all the crops this year. The crops behind me that we're looking at are all dry land, so that means we're just relying on the natural precipitation to come down. There's wheat to my right and pea crop to the left. So far this year, we've received well above average heat and well below normal moisture. Well, there are some crops that thrive in the heat, absolutely. Something like corn is a really good example. Corn is a C4 crop, meaning it really loves to soak up the heat. That's why they grow it a lot out east in places like Ontario. It still is water limited though, so irrigated corn is definitely a big crop for southern Alberta. I've already seen some stands up for the Tabor corn, meaning they've probably got a pretty delicious harvest coming up soon.
According to Environment Canada, there's a chance of rain on Saturday for our region, but it'll be less than 2 millimeters. The heat wave continues across southwestern Alberta. It's getting very hot for many people in our streets. Groups like Streets Alive in Lethbridge find the hotter summer months a challenge in helping the homeless stay hydrated.
The biggest thing we're doing is trying to keep the street population hydrated. They are at significant risk for heat exhaustion and dehydration because they have no access to something as simple as water. So we're making sure that we can get bottles of water into their hands so that they can carry them around, refill them whenever they get an opportunity, and that way it can help them survive in this type of a heat wave. Just this morning, we had a call from one of our radio station friends, and they put out a call to their listeners this morning who have responded in ways that I can't even describe. And we have significant levels of water arriving here this afternoon. So we're very, very excited. A lot of our regular donors and the regular population here in Lethbridge have always known that summertime is hard for us, and that water is really important. So we've had a little bit of a consistent supply, but nothing that's going to meet the next 2 weeks.
The Lethbridge Hurricanes have made an interesting off-season move. Right winger Zane Franklin and a fourth-round draft pick in 2020 have been traded to Kamloops in exchange for Jackson Shepherd. Franklin is coming off a 38-point season with the Canes, skating in 67 games and adding 6 points in the playoffs. 18-year-old Shepherd scored 22 points in a full season with the Blazers and tallied 12 in 41 games the year before. Jerome McGinley says the hardest part of retiring from hockey at the age of 41 is not having won a Stanley Cup. The former Flames captain, who spent 16 seasons in Calgary, returned to the city to make his retirement official.
God bless your heart for everything you've done for us. Thank you so much.
Playing in the NHL, it's not something that you're excited to get a congratulations for retiring. You know, it's an amazing job, and I remember starting hockey at age 7 and going to my first tryout and dreaming of how great it would be, and it's been even better. These 20 years in the NHL, it's been better, and I'm excited for retirement and to be with my family, but I'm going to miss all of you and all of this, and so many great memories.
It's not easy. It's not easy putting in. I found one of the hardest things was I always dreamed about, being part of a winner and winning a Stanley Cup. And part of the hardest, I talked to friends, guys I played with, and Cammy and Camilleri, and you talked to Connie and Noodles, and you just come to terms, and it did. It took me, a few days or a week when you realize you're not going to get that chance and that dream's not going to come true, but I have so many things to be thankful for. Well, I'm thankful for the times that I got from 35 on that I played elsewhere too. It was good for me and good for my family. In the way but I didn't want, I'm thrilled to be able to come back today and not be like, I just took off and that's the end, you know what I mean? Because this is home. This is, like I said, this is Alberta's home. From minor hockey coming down to play games here and growing up here from 19 on. In the city, when you play here, we always see as a player it's just on the ice and stuff, but you make friends throughout the community, from the barber shop to where you go to for physio or different stuff away, or your dentists and things like all through the community. So it is special to be back. There's a lot of friends and it's great fans, and it's overwhelming.
Wildfire crews in the Okanagan are switching focus after spending most of the month battling a series of fires on the west side of Okanagan Lake. Officials say the 18-kilometer Mount Aeneas fire between Peachland and Summerland is now under control, as are 2 other nearby blazes, so crews are focusing on wildfires burning south of Kelowna, the worst being Okanagan Mountain Provincial Park and the Goods Creek fire. Now, the Goods Creek fire has charred almost 14 square kilometers of land and is growing. Fortunately, it's moving south away from Kelowna. Police have identified the 3 victims of a small plane crash in Maine as a couple from Niagara-on-the-Lake and their 24-year-old daughter. 58-year-old Joseph Robertson and his 58-year-old wife Anita, along with their daughter Laura, died when the plane crashed into a field near an airport in Greenville yesterday after it left Pembroke en route to PEI. The family is prominent in St. Catharines, Ontario, where they made major financial contributions to a performing arts centre and were active in the United Way. Officials say the family was on their way to a vacation in Charlottetown when the plane crashed. Canadian rock band Billy Talent is hosting a benefit concert in Toronto, raising money for the victims of last week's mass shooting in the city's Greek neighborhood. Tickets for the Toronto Together fundraiser go on sale tomorrow for the August 11th concert. The event takes place at the Danforth Music Hall, just steps away from the area where a gunman killed 2 people and injured 13 others. Proceeds from the concert will be donated to this Toronto Strong Fund. Many Canadians feel Prime Minister Justin Trudeau waited far too long to visit Toronto after the mass shooting which claimed 2 lives. You can include one of our Ottawa contributors, Brian Lilly, in that group. Brian says it was a tough situation for Trudeau.
He didn't show up for more than a week. He was absent. He was surfing off of Vancouver Island. It would have been easy for him to do this. This is the type of thing prime ministers have done in the past. This is the type of thing American presidents do all the time. and yet Justin Trudeau didn't. So while I want to cut all politicians some slack, he does deserve some criticism for just staying on vacation in the middle of a national tragedy.
Catch my entire interview with Mr. Lilly as we also discuss illegal border crossings and decriminalizing all drugs coming up after business news. 8 states in the U.S. are filing suit against the Trump administration over its decision to allow a company in Texas to publish downloadable blueprints for a 3D printed gun. The states contend hard-to-trace plastic weapons threaten public safety.
The Trump administration recently chose to give access to potentially untraceable and undetectable firearms to any felon, domestic abuser, or terrorist with a laptop and access to a 3D printer. Let me be clear, no background check, no waiting period, no serial number. Some of these 3D printed guns are made with materials that will not set off a metal detector. This settlement has already been filed with the courts, and we recently learned that the organization in question, Defense Distributed, plans to post its downloadable ghost guns online this Wednesday. We intend to stop that from happening nationwide.
As the Attorney General said earlier today, they really threw the game. The government had been winning in court on this case for the past more than 18 months, and so there was really no reason for them to do what they did. It was clearly a very political move on their part, and it's one that definitely puts lives in danger around our country.
I think it's a more important win for the First Amendment because it really does take a step away from a very dangerous prior restraint censorship power that the government had been asserting. But it's always been lawful to make your own gun for your own personal use. If you want to give it away or sell it to somebody, then you need a federal manufacturing license. But it's always been the law in the United States you can make your own gun for yourself. I mean, just like you can grow your own food for yourself in your garden.
What do you say to someone who has lost a loved one? Should you not say anything at all and maybe just be a sounding board? Just be there for that person. Dr. Edward Moody, psychologist and Associate Dean of the School of Education at North Carolina Central University, says there are certain things you should never say.
Another thing people tend to do is they begin to talk about themselves. Someone loses a child and they say, well, when my cousin died or my uncle died, we really don't want to do that. Instead of concentrating so much about saying the right thing, we want to focus on doing the right thing. What kinds of needs might they have? What might we be able to do to assist them in their particular situation and go forth with that.
Watch the full interview with Dr. Moody as he discusses the best ways of helping someone through a crisis coming up in the second half of our show. American culture appears to be becoming less hospitable to people of faith. U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions says Christians are important and vowed the U.S. Justice Department would protect people's religious freedom and convictions.
There can be no doubt that we are stronger as a nation because of the contribution of religious people. Every day across America, they feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, educate our young people, care for the sick. They do so not because the government tells them to, but because they want to. But in recent years, the cultural climate in this country and in the West more generally has become less hospitable to people of faith. Many Americans have felt that their freedom to practice their faith has been under attack, and it's easy to see why. We've seen nuns ordered to buy contraceptives. We've seen United States senators ask judicial and executive branch nominees about dogma, even though the Constitution explicitly prohibits a religious test for public office. Let's be frank. A dangerous movement, undetected by many, but real, is now challenging and eroding a great tradition of religious freedom. There can be no doubt, it's no little matter. It must be confronted intellectually and politically and defeated.
A pair of wildfires that prompted evacuation orders for nearly 20,000 people moved towards small lake towns in Northern California today. Now, those fires are among 17 that are currently burning across the state. So far, the flames have blackened more than 60,000 acres or 277 square kilometers with minimal containment. Just when you've seen everything, check this out. Two men have confessed to snatching a small shark from a Texas aquarium's interactive touch tank. They then whisked it away, wrapping it in a baby blanket and concealing it in a baby stroller. The shark was recovered Monday from a home filled with fish tanks and other marine wildlife. Authorities are speaking with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration to determine whether any federal charges should be laid. That is quite the souvenir they walked away with, or strolled away with. I mean, who steals a shark? It was another hot and dry day in Lethbridge, and another fire advisory has been issued by Lethbridge County. But is a reprieve on the way? I'll have complete weather details coming up shortly. I hope you loaded up on lots of sunscreen this week. Lots of sunshine today. Tonight, a few clouds and a low near 15. Lots of sunshine today, and tomorrow will be even hotter. A high-pressure system has moved in, clearing out the clouds, and we should get up to 34 degrees tomorrow. Thursday, blue sky, sunshine, and a high near 32 is expected. Friday, mainly sunny with a high near 27. Saturday, there's a 30% chance of rain and the mercury dropping to 19. But Sunday, the clouds will clear out, bringing more sunshine and a high near 27. Looking at our almanac, the average high for this time of year is 26 degrees with an average low of 11. The highest temperature on this date was recorded in 1973 at 34 degrees, and the record low was 3 in 1968. Sunrise was at 6 o'clock, sunset at 9:15. Let's look at how tomorrow is shaping up across the country. Vancouver had a heat warning today. Tomorrow, mainly sunny with a high near 24. Victoria will be even warmer. Just a few clouds and a high of 25 is expected. A 30% chance of rain in Calgary tomorrow and a high near 27. Edmonton may also receive some shower activity on Wednesday and get up to 24. Regina will be mainly sunny and a high near 26. Pretty much the same picture in Saskatoon, just a few clouds and a high near 26. Lots of sun on tap for Winnipeg tomorrow and a high near 22. A good chance of thunder showers in Toronto tomorrow and 25. Ottawa will also have rain and 26. Rain is forecast in Montreal tomorrow, as they should see a high near 27. Over the Maritimes, Fredericton, New Brunswick had a heat warning today. Tomorrow, much the same with a high expected near 31. Halifax, Nova Scotia will have sunshine at 31 as well. Charlottetown had a heat warning today. Tomorrow, mainly sunny and a high of 31. St. John's, Newfoundland will have a few clouds and a high near 28 expected on Wednesday. Analysts say stronger than expected growth in the Canadian economy in May was the biggest gain in more than 10 years. Stats Canada says the economy grew by 0.5% thanks to good performances by both domestic and export-oriented sectors. A senior economist with RBC says it was above market expectations of 0.3%. Josh Nye says the solid growth numbers increase expectations that the Bank of Canada will raise its key overnight rate again this year. That may happen as early as October. WestJet stock plummeted 10% today after the airline reported a rare loss of $20.8 million in the second quarter. The same time last year, the company reported a profit of $48.6 million. WestJet's revenue came in at $1.09 billion. That is up 2.8% from last year's second quarter, but still below analysts' expectations. The airline says the cost of fuel was up 30.6%, which impacted profits, as did the potential of a pilot strike in May, which had a negative impact on bookings. As Cavendish Farms is building a new $360 million potato processing plant in Lethbridge, it is closing its fresh potato packaging facility in O'Leary, PEI by the end of the year. The company says it is because of a shortage of raw potato product on the island. The move will affect about 40 jobs at the plant. The company says it will give new job assignments for the employees affected. Cavendish says, however, if island farmers are not able to grow more potatoes, the industry may not be sustainable as competition in the frozen potato export market intensifies. The Vice President of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture says the number of migrant workers coming into Canada could double in the next decade. Norm Hall says the fact that there are fewer farm kids and the government wants to increase agricultural supply are contributing to a labor shortage. Hall says the U.S. can bring in workers easier than Canada, partly because it is less far for immigrants to travel, but also because of less red tape. He says someone from Nicaragua can be guaranteed work in the United States in about 3 months, whereas in Canada, it could take up to a year for the paperwork to go through. Now, here's a look at today's markets. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, a new report says EpiPens are in very limited supply across Canada right now. There are currently no alternative brands available in our country. The company says it is able to provide EpiPen in doses for kids, but supply is being carefully managed. Health Canada says people who only have expired EpiPens should immediately call 911 and that the shortage is being caused by Pfizer Canada supplier manufacturing issues. The company is hoping to have new product out by the end of August. When you see news happening, make sure you drop us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. And if you missed any of today's top stories, check out our full newscast online at bridgecitynews.ca. It was a no-win situation for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau in regards to the recent shooting in Toronto, which left 2 dead and 13 injured. One of our Ottawa contributors, Brian Lilly, explains next. But first, here's a look at what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News community calendar. Shakespeare in the Park 2018 season is featuring The Tempest. Enjoy performances every Thursday and Friday at 7 p.m. in Galt Gardens Amphitheatre until August 10th. This event is free, but donations after the show are gratefully appreciated. For more information, call Kate at 403-329-4568. The Galt Historic Railway Park is offering rides and tours on Saturday, August 18th and Saturday, August 25th from 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. Enjoy a tour of the 1890 International Train Station and take a ride on the restored speeder motor car. The Railway Park is located 1 kilometer north of Sterling, Alberta. Tickets are $10 per person and children 10 and under are free. For more details, visit galtrailway.com. The Helen Schuler Nature Center is always looking for energetic individuals to assist them in their day-to-day operations. If you have a keen interest in nature and love sharing it with others, then join the Helen Schuler Nature Center volunteer team. Visit lethbridge.ca/things-to-do/nature center for more information and to apply online. And that's your Bridge City News community calendar.
When you go to various border checkpoints between Canada and the United States, you will see signage which warns asylum seekers against illegal border crossings, yet many are still doing it. Joining me now via Skype from Ottawa's Brian Lilly. Brian, the Liberals are asking us to stop referring to it as illegal border crossings, just call it irregular. But last time I checked, it's still illegal, isn't it?
It's funny that they're playing on this semantic game. They're trying to, I guess, go the culture war route. I can see this being a big election issue in 2019, that if you call them illegal border crossers, that you are somehow xenophobic, that you're anti-immigrant, that you're racist, and that this is going to be a wedge issue in 2019. But here's the problem. The Prime Minister has called people crossing the border at places like Roxham Road, where, let's face it, more than 90% of the people that have been intercepted by the RCMP crossing the border illegally have come across at this one road that connects, well, it was a road that at one point you could just drive across. And all you had to do back in the day was call in and say, hey, it's Joe from down the street. I'm visiting my cousin in Quebec. I'm in from New York. And they'd say, okay, let us know when you go back. It was that sort of thing. But now the road's been cut off for some time now. More than 90% of the 31,000 plus people that have come across at this one particular border crossing. And you know what? The Prime Minister's called them illegal. The Immigration Minister has said, well, I use the word illegal, I use the word irregular, they're both fine. There's a giant sign at Roxham Road, Hal, that says, stop, it's illegal to cross here. You will be arrested, you will be detained. And yet the Liberals have decided that the word illegal is wrong. Even though they've all used it, even though it is on the sign, even though you get arrested if you cross the border. You don't get into the asylum system unless you are arrested. Why are you arrested? Because it's illegal to cross the border. But this is going to be a wedge issue for 2019. The election campaign is underway already.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is back from Tofino, BC, and I guess some of his surfing adventures there. And he went to the funeral of Reese Fallon, the 18-year-old who was tragically killed in the Danforth shooting. Brian?
Yeah, so there were 2 funerals on Monday of this week. There was Reese Fallon, she's the 18-year-old, who was supposed to start studying nursing at McMaster University in Hamilton, about a 45-minute drive from where she was shot and killed. The other funeral was for 10-year-old Juliana Kozis, young girl, competitive swimmer, $1 million smile. Two beautiful young women cut down in their prime. 13 others still recovering from their injuries. And the Prime Minister did go to the funeral. I'm kind of torn on this. The Prime Minister has faced a lot of criticism for not showing up in the Danforth, for not cutting his vacation short. I can tell you that I got emails from the Liberal Party of Canada on a number of political issues. I did not get one on this from the Liberal Party of Canada. I did get one about his great brunch with the Canadian star of the Netflix hit show Queer Eye, that for a Pride brunch coming up in August. Nothing on the Danforth shooting.
Wow.
The Prime Minister issued a statement. He didn't go before the cameras. He could have easily done that without cutting his vacation short. Look, politicians always run the risk when an event like this happens. If they rush to the scene too quickly, they're exploiting it for political gain. If they don't show up until it's too late, then they're cold and callous. And so I do try and cut them some slack. Here's what I'll say, though. The Prime Minister could have called the media and said, all right, I'm on Vancouver Island. I'm going to drive down to Victoria. I'm going to make a brief statement on this terrible tragedy that's happened in Toronto, and then we'll go from there. He didn't show up for more than a week. He was absent. He was surfing off of Vancouver Island. It would have been easy for him to do this. This is the type of thing prime ministers have done in the past. This is the type of thing American presidents do all the time, and yet Justin Trudeau didn't. So while I want to cut all politicians some slack, he does deserve some criticism for just staying on vacation in the middle of a national tragedy.
Now, Brian, more details are coming to the surface about the Danforth shooter, including a massive drug and gun bust from late last year.
Yeah, and it's not directly related to the Danforth shooter, but through his brother. And so, people are trying to say, who was this guy? Because the family hasn't spoken publicly. The family has not spoken to the media. The family has not spoken to the community. There was one statement put out on behalf of the family, and not even by a family friend. It was by a man who is a bit of a PR agent, who admitted later that he doesn't really know the family, but he wanted to help out. Okay, I can understand wanting to help out a family struggling. And I can't begin to imagine what it's like to find out that your son, your brother, your cousin has committed an horrific act like this. I mean, it's just dumbfounding. It's heart-wrenching, all of those things. But the family hasn't spoken. All we have is this statement crafted by a PR expert that says he suffered from psychosis, he had mental illness problems. None of that backed up, none of that verified, no documentation, no statements from family members to verify any of this. We heard that the family had been dealing with some problems, including the father having health issues, a sister being killed in a car crash, and a brother in a coma. Well, then it comes out that the brother is in a coma, and this brother is someone who was facing charges for dealing crack cocaine. There are reports that the gun that was used was stolen from a gun shop in Saskatoon back in 2015 when his brother was there dealing drugs. And often drugs and break-and-enters go together. Now, some people are casting doubt on that story of the gun's origins, but this is what we have in the media to work on for now. When the brother was sent back to Ontario, Hal, he was told that he had to go and live at a home in Pickering. He breached bail conditions. The judge said, you've got to go live with your surety. He was sent to a home in Pickering, Ontario. That's about a half-hour drive from where the Danforth, a half-hour to 45-minute drive from where the Danforth shooting happened. He ends up in a coma because of a drug overdose. Later, this home's raided, more than 30 handguns seized, and 42 kilos of carfentanil. Carfentanil is the much stronger, deadlier cousin of fentanyl. This is the fake opioid, synthetic opioid that has wreaked havoc across North America. It's designed to tranquilize large animals like elephants. $13 million is what it could fetch on the streets, according to cops. Some people are speculating on whether this is this someone trying to use it for to get rich off the street, or was it, weapons of mass destruction type thing? With the police not speaking, we don't know, and that leads to an awful lot of speculation. But with his brother being involved in drug dealing, with gang activity in the neighborhood they grew up in Thorncliffe Park, with the home that he was living in that the judge ordered him to go live in being raided, there's an awful lot of questions coming out of this. And unfortunately, the authorities are not answering any of them.
Now, Brian, speaking of drugs, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh has already gone on record to say that Canada should decriminalize all drugs. Toronto has gone on record saying, hey, that sounds like a pretty good idea. And now Montreal apparently wants to follow suit.
Yeah, okay. So in fairness, because I know we're going to talk about Toronto City Council in a minute, and people want to get angry at politicians. It's not necessarily the politicians in Toronto and Montreal saying this. It is their chief medical officers that are saying decriminalize all drugs in Canada's two largest cities. Here's the thing. The feds have already come out, the Trudeau government has said, look, we are legalizing marijuana. We're legalizing cannabis. We're not touching any other drugs. We're not going to make it so that you can get heroin at the corner store or that buying heroin on the street is fine, which is a bit of a strange thing. I don't know what it's like where you are, Hal, but here within a 4-block radius of the radio station that I work at in the Byward Market, big tourist destination in the nation's capital, gorgeous spot. Within 4 blocks, there are 4 different so-called safe injection sites or supervised injection sites. So the federal government has legalized those. Provincial governments are funding those, but we're still decriminalizing. I think that we're headed this way, whether we want to or not. And it's going to be kind of the Overton window approach. We're going to slowly see things move along from unacceptable to reality in slow chunks. And average people are going to be sitting there saying, when did this become acceptable? So while the federal government is downplaying and saying, we're not going to follow Jagmeet Singh's advice, we're not going to follow the advice of the chief medical officer in Toronto or Montreal, eventually, Hal, I think we're going to end up there.
Brian, a big story we've been following here at Bridge City News. By the end of the fall, Greyhound's going to be pulling out of Western Canada. Now, a small majority of Canadians are in favor of the government subsidy to keep Greyhound bus service going. According to the Angus Reid poll, 60% support government-funded rural bus service, Brian?
Yeah, unfortunately, the support for that government-funded rural bus service isn't in the areas that's actually going to be affected by the shutdown of Greyhound. It's in Quebec, where they don't have this problem. So, look, Greyhound is pulling out because there isn't an economically viable situation in many parts of Alberta and Saskatchewan and in certain parts of British Columbia. So, look, you want to take a bus from Edmonton to Vancouver, you're still going to be able to. You want to take a bus from Edmonton to Slave Lake? We'll see. We'll see if that's still going in a year's time. In Alberta and Saskatchewan, the support just isn't there. That's not surprising, especially on the Saskatchewan side. They just shut down their government-run bus service a little while ago. It was in Brad Wall's last budget. I believe the STC it was called, the Saskatchewan Transit Commission. They got rid of that. Nobody was riding it. Look, this is an opportunity. As our friend Lauren Gunter was writing about recently, he said there's several reasons for the bus service shutting down. You want to take a bus from Edmonton to Winnipeg, it's going to take you a very long time to get there. And it's going to be expensive. And guess what? You can probably get a cheap flight for about the same price. So why are you going to take the bus and take many, many hours longer, probably a day, when you can get there in 2 hours? So you've got that happening. When Greyhound shut down its service in Atlantic Canada, which happened several years ago, people were worried about the same sort of thing. What happened was small companies sprouted up and they said, okay, well, we're not going to run a 64-seater, but you know what we will run? We'll run those little commuter coach buses, and some of them will have 10 seats, some of them will have 15, some of them will have 21, and we'll run those. And what we run will be dependent on what people are willing to pay. Are enough people willing to go between these smaller communities? The simple fact is how most people are driving their own cars. I've been a Greyhound user. I've been a Via Rail user. I've been a public transit user. All of these things my whole life. At different times, I've used them, and they have a place, but you can't require them to be there if people just aren't going to use them. Why have them there for one single person? There's a town in north of Toronto that recently decided it was going to scrap its public bus service because no one was using it. You know what they did? They hired Uber.
Oh, there you go. Brian, Doug Ford is not making a lot of friends at Toronto City Council as he's slashing the amount of city councillors in half to 25. Ford says, hey, you know, Toronto's got 25 MPs, 25 MPPs. Why not 25 city councillors? That's angered many in Toronto, including Toronto Mayor John Tory.
Okay, so he's not making fans with politicians, but I'm not sure that he's actually upsetting the public, at least not on the overall issue. Some people are going to be upset at the lack of consultation. Some people are going to be upset at the timeline, but very few people are going to be upset at the fact that there are going to be fewer people. I put this out on my radio show earlier this week, and I said, okay, they cut City Hall at Toronto. What should we do in Ottawa? And you know what people said? 77% said cut City Hall. Okay, so it's a selective group. They're following me. They're probably conservative already. They don't like politicians. But 77%. Most people don't argue for more politicians. They argue for fewer politicians. So John Tory is saying all these things in public. Here's what I think John Tory actually wants. John Tory is not all that upset at lowering the number of councillors. He's upset at the timeline. He's upset at the lack of consultation. But he's also upset at the fact that he doesn't have a strong mayor system. Many American cities have what's called a strong mayor system, and that's where the mayor has an executive council around them. They write the budget, they push an agenda, and then council votes with the mayor. In Canada, we have a weak mayor system. Pretty much across the country, we have a weak mayor system where the mayor, despite being elected citywide, only has one vote. They are as effective as an individual city councillor. So I think John Tory would like to see, he'd be fine with this change going through if we adopted what's called the strong mayor system. We'll see if that goes through as part of these changes. But Doug Ford dropped a big bomb last week, and I don't think it's going to cost him a single vote the next time that he faces the electorate. I know it's 4 years away, Hal, but I don't think nobody's going to be saying, you know what I need, Hal? I need more politicians in my life.
I'm wondering if some people think, too, this is sour grapes from when he used to be on Toronto City Council as well.
Well, there's a bit of that, and two other things that he did. He canceled this was going to be the first time. I don't want to get too inside baseball, but this was going to be the first time that there was an elected chair for Peel Region. Now, that's Mississauga and Brampton, two very large cities next to Toronto. And Patrick Brown, the former PC leader, was going to run there. Of course, Doug Ford replaced him, so he canceled that election. And the big region just north of Toronto, York Region, they were going to have their first ever election for a regional chair. The guy expected to win that was a guy named Stephen Del Duca, former Liberal cabinet minister. Well, this guy is someone that really annoyed a union called LIUNA, the Laborers International Union of North America, and they ended up backing Doug Ford. They were so angry at Steve Del Duca, who tried to, take jobs away from them, essentially. So it was a little bit of payback on the York one, a little bit of vengeance on Patrick Brown. There's a lot of things going into this, including the fact that Doug Ford really does think that there are too many politicians at Toronto City Hall.
One of our Ottawa contributors, Brian Lilly, joining me via Skype. Thanks again, Brian.
Thank you, Hal.
The world today is full of hurting people, so how do we help them? For most of us, it's really hard to know what to say or do. Dr. Edward Moody, he's a psychologist and associate dean of the School of Education at North Carolina's Central University and author of the book, First Aid for Emotional Hurts, Helping People Through Difficult Times. Dr. Moody's joining me now from Raleigh, North Carolina. Welcome back to Bridge City News.
It's good to see you. Thank you, Hal.
And I see you got the memo about the blue shirt, the red tie, and the navy blazer. We look like twins here today.
Good tie. I've got to say, you've got a really good outfit over there, Hal. Looking sharp.
Yes, yes, you look fairly sharp as well. Good choice there today. Now, there are a lot of hurting people in the world today, including neighbors and coworkers. You say that hurting people desperately need someone to talk to. So how do we become someone that others want to talk with?
One of the things is just being willing, being open to other folks. We have a tendency, at least in the South, where I'm at, in the United States, to say, "How are you doing?" And sometimes folks will begin to say, "Well, I'm having a pretty bad day." And folks will almost put their hand up and say, "No, no, no, no. I didn't really mean how are you doing. I was just saying hi." And so part of it is when we interact with different individuals, we're willing to stop and listen to them, willing to pay attention to the various needs that they have. I see in the Bible where Joseph comes across these fellows in the prison one day. He can see they're kind of down, and he says, "You guys look like things are kind of down for you, like you're having trouble today." And he asks them about it. So one of the things we can do is just be willing to listen to people, be willing to reach out to them, be present when someone is in a lot of pain, going through some various difficulties.
Now, in recent months, we've witnessed school shootings, wildfires, floods. What should we be doing to help those going through really difficult times?
Well, when we see someone going through difficult times, we want to pay attention to them, be willing to maybe go and take them out to eat, take them to do some coffee or something along those lines. Be willing to also listen to them. And like if someone has lost a loved one, we don't just pay attention to them in the immediate aftermath of that event. We watch them and notice when the birthday of that person comes up or there's a particular anniversary. We know that that's not a hurt that's going to go away pretty quickly. So we're willing to be present with them and be helpful with them over time, not just in the immediate aftermath of an event. Folks tend to go on with their lives after something bad happens and they move to the next thing. And so if we're a friend or if they're a family member of ours or even go to our church, we don't forget that. We know that they hurt as they go along with time as well.
Now, there's certain things we should maybe not be doing to help those or maybe give advice to somebody who's in need or hurting?
Yes, sometimes people are real quick to maybe try to encourage someone that's gone through a loss, for example. One of the most common things that happens is someone will walk up and recite a Bible verse like Romans 8:28, all things work together for good of those who love God. Well, that's a true scripture, but it's not the right time to say it after someone's lost their spouse or they've lost a child. So one of the things we want to do is kind of put ourselves in the shoes of the person that's lost a loved one. Think about how they might feel or what that might be like for them, and to stop and think that through before we go and say something to them. Another thing people tend to do is they begin to talk about themselves. Someone loses a child and they say, "Well, when my cousin died or my uncle died," we really don't want to do that. Instead of concentrating so much about saying the right thing, we want to focus on doing the right thing. What kinds of needs might they have? What might we be able to do to assist them in their particular situation and go forth with that.
Now, you say that being a helper does not necessarily mean that we're always pleasant. Can you explain that?
Yes, so sometimes we're dealing with a person that's getting engaged in some sort of addiction, getting off track in a bad behavior, or maybe even they're not treating their spouse or their children as they ought to. So the scripture has talked to us about confronting people from time to time, and the Proverbs also talk about the wounds of a friend. So we say, I'm getting a little concerned with you, and it seems like you're getting a bit off track. I noticed what you said to Linda, their spouse, the other day, and I get upset with my spouse from time to time too, but maybe if you want to have a good relationship with her, maybe this might be a way to go. So sometimes we have a tendency to say, well, that's none of my business. I'm going to step back. I'm going to get away from that. We need to continue to spend time with people and often talk to them when we see them getting off track or going astray a little bit.
What kinds of things stop us from helping other people out? Is it that I don't want the drama in my life? Maybe there's a financial cost? What are your thoughts?
That's very true. We can be frightened, for example, like if someone's having a relationship problem with their spouse. If I get involved with them, it could be some sort of domestic violence situation, which could lead to a greater difficulty. So sometimes we're getting afraid. We're like, I don't want to get involved in that. It could put my own children or it could put someone else in danger. Sometimes we just think about the time. It takes a lot of time to help someone that's hurting. And what I try to stress is you can spend time with them on the front end or the back end. And so maybe you've got a friend that's a little bit discouraged. You go ahead and spend some time with them, and it doesn't turn into depression or even something that's suicidal down the road. You go ahead and you focus on them and spend some time with them, and that can limit or decrease the likelihood of something materializing into something really bad later on. So what we stress is, yes, you might get hurt or it might take you a lot of time, but if you can do some things, some precautions to protect yourself and decrease the likelihood of getting hurt, and really it's worth it in the long run when we spend time with others and we try to assist them with the difficulties they're going through.
Now, you talk about how important resilience is in regard to how people recover from trauma. Is it possible for a person to somehow learn to become resilient?
I really think so. So I think if we think in our mind that bad things can happen to good people, and we approach difficult things or tragic events that happen to say, you know, this is part of what happens or can happen with life, have a little bit of a different attitude about it, more like Job did toward the end after the Lord appeared to him. Kind of think about how God takes bad things and uses them for our good. I do think it does help us in the long run to be in a better situation and to be more resilient.
Now, many of us have dreams of living a perfect, beautiful life. But is that kind of a false expectation in a sense? I mean, we tend to get surprised when bad stuff actually does happen.
We do, and it's almost like we haven't really paid attention to the Bible. You know, all the apostles seem to have gone through great difficulty. There is the book of Job and all those Psalms that talk about suffering and so forth. So it's a little bit like, I think if I'm a good person, then everything's going to work out well for me and I'm going to have a real smooth and good life. The scripture doesn't teach that. The Lord doesn't promise us that we're going to have just a great time, but does tell us, though, that we're going to have difficulties. And so I think it helps us if we recognize that. We read passages like Psalm 46, and we recognize that though we're not promised that our good health or our spouse will live to a ripe old age, we realize that God's there and He's going to help us when we do go through those difficulties. He promises to help us through hard times. He doesn't promise to spare us from those difficulties.
Now, in your book, you include an entire chapter about depression. Why is depression increasing in spite of counseling and drugs being so readily available?
Well, part of the reason I think depression increases is we may try other ways of trying to satisfy ourselves and try to gratify ourselves, and there's really nothing that fills that void except for the Lord. The other aspect is depression is a natural thing, or it can be a natural thing in life. You see Elijah struggle with depression at a particular point in his ministry. John the Baptist sure did get discouraged when he finds himself in the dungeon of that prison. And so I think part of it is all of us may struggle, maybe not with clinical depression, but with discouragement at some points in our lives. And then we may try other ways of making ourselves very happy, very satisfied, other than the Lord. And those are just not going to meet those needs. Nothing but Jesus really meets those needs. And that could be another reason for the rise that we see in depression.
The Me Too movement has brought a lot of attention to sexual abuse. How can ordinary people help someone who may have been abused this way?
We want to be willing to listen to a person and have a person realize no matter what they tell us, we'll listen to them and we can kind of take it. And especially with the area of sexual abuse and rape, people really don't want to hear about that, and they want to almost pretend that those things do not happen. When I was working in the field, sometimes I would work at the same time with someone who had been shot or injured in a particular automobile accident, and at other times, on the same day at points, I would deal with someone who had been molested or raped. The people who had been shot or injured in an automobile accident recovered far easier. And I think part of it is no one wants to hear about a person being molested or raped, and they often feel like they're shunned or like they're even a second-class citizen and so forth. So I think we want to remind them, you are special, you matter to God. What this person has done to you does not change who you are, and to be willing to be able to listen to them and partner with them as they go through that particular pain and help them along.
Now, Dr. Moody, we live in a culture that seems to place large importance on feeling good, even if it means getting there artificially through substance abuse. Any thoughts on that?
It doesn't work. And so whether it's gaming, whether it's particular substance or some other activity, even like gambling, if we artificially produce a feeling of good, like having neurotransmitters like dopamine all in our, flooding our brain, so to speak, and we do that in an artificial way, it's actually counterproductive, and it results in someone having to engage in particular activities or particular behaviors to get the same high or to get the same feeling. And so what we really find is a person has to kind of do these things naturally, because when they do it through some sort of artificial means, often they feel worse, and that's something else that can lead to depression. So when people get entangled in some of these behaviors or with some of these substances, they often need to have that completely detox from their system and go back to a situation where they're naturally happy through relationships, through interpersonal interactions they may have with others, to have that same situation where they really do feel good in a healthy way.
So what kind of an impact does addiction actually have on the brain? Are some people a little more susceptible to addiction than others?
I think there are, to answer it in a reverse way, there are definitely people that are more susceptible to addictions. And so you may see someone move from like a substance to some particular behavior, or maybe like cocaine to something like alcohol or another particular substance. But one thing that happens, whether it be a behavioral addiction or a substance addiction, it changes the way our brain works. And so that's why it's so dangerous for someone often when they're trying to stop, because they get really down, they get really depressed because their brain is not working as it did before. But the good news is when someone detoxes, and whether it's a substance or an activity, when they quit doing that, eventually their brain can almost have a reset, if you will, and can begin to function in a healthier way. But we must remember, when people go down those roads, it really does change their brain in certain ways. And so that's why it's hard for them to listen to us at times, hard for them to respond appropriately, and really to get themselves out of some of those situations on their own.
So what do we say to someone who is addicted? What can a non-professional do to help?
I think we need to mention, we notice it, point out what it's doing to them, what it's doing to their family. Sometimes we've seen in some of the reality television shows where they'll do an intervention. Sometimes that's something that's necessary, where someone would be in a confined situation to get the substance out of their system or the behavior, get away from that behavior for a bit. But I do think we have to approach them and realize they're not going to respond really happy to us. They're not going to be thrilled with what we're saying to them, but we confront them. And often when they're receiving that message from different areas, it's more likely they'll listen. And if there's someone that you're connected to in a family way, I do think it's sometimes necessary to do some other intervention that might involve law enforcement or medical professionals to get them the kind of help that they actually need.
Now, you include a final chapter in your book for families going through difficult times. What is your advice? To basically stick together through thick and thin?
It is, unless we're in a situation where it's domestic violence. So the research tells us, for the most part, when people find themselves and they're unhappy, if they do stick together within 5 years, they tend to revert back to a period of happiness. And so there's kind of this whole, this is all about me attitude, where I'm a consumer in my marriage. But if you look at it as, I've committed to this person, I'm here to serve this person. And again, if it's not a domestic violence situation, usually as a rule, people revert back. They end up being happy again. Sometimes down the road, they learn how to interact and to work with folks. So in the book, we talk a lot about how you do need to interact well, not having contempt, not having criticism, but instead treating your spouse in a loving way. you can see things turn around and you can see a quite different situation. And then if you have children, the best thing you can do is try to work it out and get along well, because if things don't go well, if you've got a toxic environment, it terribly impacts the children, impacts life expectancy, even like their earnings later on in their lives.
Dr. Edward Moody, author of First Aid for Emotional Hurts, helping people through difficult times, and a gentleman with great taste in clothes. Thanks a lot for joining me today.
Thanks, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and have a great night.